On WTVP's Docs on Call, appetizers, desserts, stuffing, gravy, alcohol, all things that contribute to weight gain during the holidays. Coming up, advice on how to enjoy yourself while taking care of yourself. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Welp. Studies show the average person gains about half a pound to 1.5 pounds between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day. Tonight we want to give you tips on how to enjoy yourself at holiday dinners and parties without paying too big of a price. We're joined by two oncology dietitians from the OSF Healthcare Cancer Institute here in Peoria, Sydney Russell and Ashley Mathewson. Good to see you both.
Good to see you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming in. And boy, this is the time of year where we are all tempted to overindulge and overindulge and overindulge. Sydney, I'll start with you. How should people plan, or how can they plan before they go to these parties and dinners as to not eat too much and eat things they shouldn't?
Sure, yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think it really starts early. So in the morning, have a good breakfast with protein and fiber foods, and then continue to have consistent meals throughout the day. That kind of sounds like it's counterintuitive. Sometimes we think we need to save up calories for that big meal at dinner, but actually eating consistently throughout the day can help keep our blood sugars balanced and reduce those cravings so that we're not overly ravenous by the time we get to that dinner. So those are, some really good things to keep in mind. Also, being able to kind of start small, thinking ahead to that dinner game plan, right? Game plan for those kinds of small goals you can set with yourself. Maybe trying to get 2 to 3 fruits or vegetables in at the appetizer, and then those fiber foods at dinner too. And then filling in with those really delicious holiday favorites.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned fiber. Does fiber make you feel full?
It does, yes. Fiber helps us feel fuller for longer. And when paired with those protein foods, it's a powerhouse. Yeah. So really emphasizing that fiber can be helpful for those blood sugars and helping us feel full too.
Ashley, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, when we're talking about fiber, a lot of people are kind of unsure, well, where do I get fiber? So you can get them from a variety of foods that we eat every day. Hopefully we're eating lots of fruits and vegetables. That's a main source of fiber. We're also getting them from the whole grains. So that's why we kind of push for more of those whole grains versus the refined white grains, because you're getting more fiber that's going to fill you up a little bit more. You're also going to get those from some of the lean proteins like beans. So anytime we can sneak those into our dishes, that's going to just help with that satiety and making us feel fuller longer.
Okay. Yeah. I have to admit, I'm one of those people that would fast before the big party so that I could eat all the good stuff I don't get to eat during the rest of the year.
Sure, yeah.
It's really tempting. Okay, so don't do that.
Yeah.
Tell us, what are some of the least healthiest things that we're going to be seeing at our holiday dinners and parties?
Yes. So those things that may not make us feel very good after we overindulge in them are going to be those heavier dishes. So think about like anything with like a lot of creams, using things with a lot of butter, those fried foods. So it's more about also the preparation. Anything deep fried and a lot of cheeses and cream sauces is really the things that, taste good, but are not going to always make us feel, as good afterwards and are going to be very high in calories. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are some things that we may not think about that are actually good for you that you may want to indulge in a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we kind of think about, getting a variety of foods in there, we talked about the fiber-containing foods. So those fruits, vegetable-based, dishes, those side dishes are going to be great. But also those lean proteins. So turkey, low-sodium ham, incorporating some of those beans or lentils or other plant-based proteins into our dishes. You'd be surprised. We can really make them taste good, even though they may not be the traditional, heavy meat, heavy fat meals that we may prepare traditionally. So, yeah.
I think another fun food to add to that list on the sweet side of things is dark chocolate.
Yes.
That's kind of a hidden treasure there. Not a lot of people tend to think it might have more nutritional content to it, but compared to those milk chocolates or white chocolates, it has vitamins and minerals to it. And if it's lower in sugar, that could be a really helpful addition to desserts, or even flavor for those fruits, or drizzle on top of all kinds of fun stuff too.
Sure. You both kind of touched a little bit on portion control, but let's kind of go over how people can use that. And, I've heard tricks like, hey, use a smaller plate because you can put less things on it, unless you're like me and you go vertical. But talk about portion control and kind of, what we should be eating and how much of it.
Yeah, that's another great question too. And when I talk about portion control with patients, I like to point them to a resource called My Plate. It's by the USDA, and it gives us a visual for how to structure our plates to include all of the food groups and ultimately promote that satiety factor. So a quarter of the plate is your protein source, whether it's lean animal sources or plant-based protein sources. Another quarter should be the grains, optimally whole grains most often. And then the half of the plate the remaining half of the plate should be fruits and vegetables. There is room for dairy too. That could be low-fat, milk. It could be low-fat Greek yogurt. It could, on the plant-based side, also be soy milk and things like that. But I like to give that as a resource for patients, as a way to say, hey, portion control is not about trying to cut out or reduce those groups of food, or specific foods. It's about maximizing the benefits from all of them. But I think in regards to kind of your comments about the plate, I do really like to encourage a method that I've called the clock method. So you might have heard people taking a bite of food, then putting their fork down in between bites. This is similar, but I think it helps us get more in tune with those sensory aspects when we're eating. So I like to encourage people to take a bite of, the first item on their plate. And while they're, while it's up close, try and smell it. When it's in your mouth, try and taste it, define the textures, savor it a little bit more, and then move on to that next food item on your plate, and just work your way around, taking in all of those sensory components. But I found that also really helps people to slow down too and enjoy, ultimately helping with that portion control piece.
Let's talk about serving food, making food, things like that, whether you're having the party or you're bringing a dish to the party. Tell us about some substitutions we could use. And I know a lot about this just because I've been able to interview so many dietitians over the years. And I've always heard that using Greek yogurt instead of sour cream is a good idea. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so specifically talking about Greek yogurt instead of sour cream, what you're doing is you're actually maximizing that protein content. In about a half a cup, you're getting about 15 grams of protein, give or take. And so that's also going to help with satiety. So talking about fiber and satiety, protein's also going to make us feel fuller longer. You're also getting some really good benefits of some probiotics in there as well, which can help with our gut. Obviously, when we're eating some heavier foods, sometimes we can have some gut issues, and so that also helps with that, feed that good bacteria in there. But yeah, in addition to that, there's a lot of other things that we can swap. When we think about the traditional charcuterie board, right? We got a lot of cheeses and crackers. Don't forget to add some protein foods there too. So we can add some hummus with our veggies for something, a little bit different there. Adding lots of veggies, put the rainbow on there because we're getting a variety of nutrients in each of those kind of different colored vegetables there. So yeah, just a few there.
Any substitute ideas that you have?
Yeah, so when it comes to, our fruit-based desserts, a lot of times we're kind of opting for those in, juice and high sugar syrups, but fresh or frozen fruit, specifically frozen, can be just as healthful. It's frozen at peak ripeness, and if you find one with no added sugar to it, that can be a really beneficial swap there while still getting all that good fruity, delicious flavor.
Absolutely. And even with like baked goods too, you can swap out some of the sugar that's in your baked goods for applesauce. And so, again, you won't really taste a difference. I don't necessarily go to the extreme of saying putting black beans in your brownies, although I know some people do. I've tried it once and it was not for me, but if it's for you, go for it. But yeah, just simple swaps that you can do to really boost up the nutrition and the vitamin content in your foods, while still feeling like you're enjoying some of those, traditional foods at the holidays.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about alcohol, because that can also be something that people partake in at their parties and dinners. Some people because they like it, some people because they need it to get through the family dinner. But let's talk about alcohol, the amount people drink, and kind of what the difference is between your wines, your beers, your spirits, things like that.
Sure. So yeah, just like you said, a lot of us are reaching for alcohol around the holidays to de-stress. But physiologically, alcohol actually prompts our stress responses in our bodies. It can increase our cortisol, which is a stress hormone. It can promote inflammation. So it might actually have that opposite effect in that kind of long term, whereas the feeling of that alcohol is acute and short. So anyway, being able to opt for mocktail options is really, really helpful. They do have those anti-inflammatory benefits to them if they've got things like fruit or cinnamon, ginger, hydration, sparkling water, things like that. As oncology dietitians, we're often encouraging mocktails over those traditional cocktails, because we know from the American Institute of Cancer Research and the American Cancer Society that alcohol intake can also contribute to that cancer risk. So, mocktails, we really enjoy those and encourage those, but if you do choose to drink, then we would encourage things that are light, like your spritzers or like your low sugar cocktails too. Generally, the limits for men are 1 drink a day, or 2 drinks a day. The limits for women are 1 drink a day. And that would include, 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or 1.5 ounces of your distilled liquors too.
Does alcohol have an effect on the way your body metabolizes food at all? Is that a positive or negative thing?
Yeah, so potentially. And also we, think about, when we have that alcohol, our inhibition, right, is decreased a little bit. And so we might find that we are actually eating a lot more discretionary calories. So those calories that maybe, are those sweets or those really salty, highly processed foods too. So, kind of that aspect as well of drinking alcohol is that we tend to eat a little bit more outside of what our body really needs. So,
sure.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned that you're oncology dietitian, so let's talk about people with different medical conditions. If you're hosting a dinner and you're preparing it and you have a relative, friend, whoever, who is undergoing treatment for cancer or is a survivor, what should you be thinking about?
Yeah. So as far as, if you have somebody going through treatment, oftentimes, their needs are actually much higher. They need a lot more calories. They need a lot more protein. They deal with a lot of symptoms from whatever treatment they're going through. So they might have nausea. They might have taste changes. So, that favorite dish that you've maybe made for them in years past, now this year, it makes them nauseous to think about it, right? So it has nothing to do with you or how you're preparing those foods, but just kind of, reaching out to them in advance and saying, I want to make sure I prepare something or multiple things if you can for them that, sounds good and that's going to be really beneficial for them. I mean, it's going to go a long way and meeting those needs so they still feel included, even though, their selection of things that they can tolerate might be kind of limited. So.
And Sydney, what about maybe someone who is diabetic? What kind of options do they need?
Sure, yeah. So really focusing in on those fiber-rich dishes, fiber-rich sides, having those roasted vegetables available, having the fruit salad type of components available too. Lots of good lean protein sources to help maintain that blood sugar. So like your turkey or like your chicken or like your plant-based options. And leaving those creamier sauces, maybe higher sugar kind of desserts off to the side so that they have the ability to choose how much or what goes on their plate to top those kinds of foods.
A lot of people these days are vegan, but that's pretty easy to deal with. But what about somebody maybe that has a gluten sensitivity?
Yeah, so personally, my sister has a gluten sensitivity. So for many years now, we've adjusted, our family gatherings and our dishes to make it gluten-free, because nobody wants to sit there and feel like, oh, there's nothing I can eat except for this like one green bean, dish or whatever. So again, just reaching out to them, asking them what their specific dietary needs are, and then as far as a gluten sensitivity, you would want to avoid anything with wheat, rye, or barley. With a lot of the other food allergies that somebody might have, you can look, kind of on the back of the food label, and actually the top 8 most common allergens are going to be in bold on the ingredients list. So that might be a key, area that you can look at. And then, if they're vegan, they're vegetarian, just omitting those meat portions, dairy, you can easily swap out. Now there's, hundreds of different dairy alternative options, whether it's almond milk, soy milk, oat milk. So, when you make those mashed potatoes, just maybe add that milk alternative. And, again, just having that open discussion with them. So there's at least a couple options for them. And then the other thing, if they have a true allergy versus something they're just avoiding, maybe having those dishes a little bit off to the side. So that way, if you've got, a whole kind of table of different options, and we all tend to get a little sloppy and excited when we're filling up our plate, and things can kind of drop into different bowls, kind of think of like a food buffet, right?
Yeah.
Those aren't very safe and sanitary for those with allergies. But yeah, just having those off to the side, so then that way we make sure that they're safe and don't have any reactions. Yeah.
Great tips.
Yeah.
What about consuming water? Is that something you should consume more of maybe during the holidays or maybe the day of a party?
That's a great question too. Yeah, so especially with the higher salt foods or maybe higher sugar foods, definitely consuming a little bit more water would be helpful to offset and to keep our hydration in balance. Generally, I recommend at least 64 ounces of water or hydrating fluids per day. And yes, if you're drinking lots of salt or you're eating lots of salt and high sugar foods, it could be more.
Yeah.
That's so hard to get 64 ounces in.
It sure is.
It can be.
And while we're talking about that,
Yes.
any
Yeah.
tips on how to do that? Maybe spruce up your water a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can go ahead and take that. Yeah. So adding a little bit of flavor. I know me personally, when I add a little bit of flavor to my water, I tend to drink it a lot quicker. I also find that I personally don't drink very quickly if it's cold versus if it's more room temperature or even warm, that I will drink it a lot faster. So kind of, thinking about things that, well, what makes me drink a little bit faster? Maybe it's drinking through a straw. That might also, encourage you to drink a little bit more, or adding some fruit, some lemon juice to your water, or just some very simple natural ways to enhance that flavor. And then the last thing I would recommend is, may seem silly, but like setting a timer that goes off, maybe every hour. Okay, I need a sip, especially when you're like hyper focused on something, and or certain times of the day where you find that you go a very long time without drinking any water. So finding some of those strategies that make you want to drink it, and then also remind you, to drink more regularly. Yeah.
Are there any kind of foods that we see during the holidays that, as a dietitian, you're just like, stay away from it or have very little of it? Anything in particular?
I think that, the holidays are such a time of nostalgia and tradition and even cultural, elements to it too. And so there's nothing that I would say is off limits. I think it all just comes down to this context of balanced eating and trying to choose those foods that are going to be nourishing and going to be nutritious more often, or pairing them with those foods that are going to be heavier, maybe creamier, maybe saltier. So, really enjoy your food, enjoy those foods that maybe you're only eating once a year, right? Maybe you're looking forward to grandma's peanut butter chocolate
Pie,
right? And it's to die for, and you want to be able to celebrate that, enjoy that with your family. But again, within that context of balance too.
Yeah. I usually say the only foods that I have you avoid are if you have an allergy to them. So obviously, like she said, balance is key. So, we know how we feel after we have, maybe a couple slices of pie and, some really heavy food. We're not going to maybe feel the greatest, but did it give you joy? And did it, yes, it's for that comfort as well during the holidays. It's more about how often are we doing this. So if it's that once a year Thanksgiving or once a year Christmas, like, enjoy the holidays. It's more of that repetitive behavior that might then lead to that weight gain that you were talking about over the course of these holiday months.
Yeah, and you don't want to insult the host of the party.
Right.
Right.
At least that's the excuse I use.
Yeah.
What about after the holidays?
Yeah.
You know, you've been indulging a lot more in that month and a half than you usually do. Any tips on how to kind of get back on course?
Yeah, so I would say avoid crash diets, avoid, trying to cut out food groups, trying to have a 180 type of approach to it, and opt for, trying to find the balance again, right? Trying to reestablish your routine, set sustainable goals. So maybe that's incorporating a new fruit or a new vegetable into your weekly routine, and then trying to increase that as the weeks go by, rather than trying to completely, rearrange your whole diet. So really trying to emphasize those sustainable changes are going to be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely think that small sustainable changes over time are going to make a big impact, right? So we tend to think like January 1st is when we get that gym membership. This is when we're following these very strict diets, and then maybe 2 to 4 weeks into it, we're maybe worse off actually than we were before. And so setting those realistic goals and having a buddy too, a buddy system I think is really great. Hold each other accountable, but also have fun with it too, and realize that perfectionism is not the route to go when it comes to diet and exercise. Even as dietitians,
Right.
we are humans too. So you're gonna find us eating the desserts. You're gonna find us having the occasional drink. So definitely just setting, some realistic expectations as you go into the new year.
I heard a quote recently that I really liked, and it was, aim for patterns instead of perfection. And I think that is the approach that can be a really good motto going into the new year.
Sure. A lot of people are going to be, like we said, going to dinners and parties and maybe eating a lot more homemade things that they're not used to eating. When we're preparing foods, as far as food safety, what do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah. So especially for our cancer population too, they are immunocompromised a lot of times, and so they might be more susceptible to getting a foodborne illness. So we definitely want to make sure no matter what day of the year it is or who we're serving, that we are following those guidelines. So first and foremost, making sure we're washing our hands, right? Wash them for 30 seconds before you touch any food or prepare any food of any sort. Make sure you've got nice clean counters, and then when it comes to preparing the food, you want to wash your fruits and vegetables. We don't necessarily need to use any fancy soaks or sprays or anything like that, but just some good water and scrubbing if it's got a tough skin like potatoes on the outside. And then when it comes to preparing our dishes, there are guidelines as far as the meat. Typically you're going to be safe around 165. So getting a cheap meat thermometer and checking the middle of that meat, not the surface but the middle of it, is just going to ensure that we've killed off any potential bacteria that might be in there.
And there's debates, I know, in every house about leftovers, how long you should keep them, things
yes.
like that.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so if it's stored in an airtight container in your fridge, proper temperature, usually it's about 2 to 4 days that you can safely continue to eat that. But after that, would recommend, parting ways with it.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And no double dipping.
Right,
No double dipping.
yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think folks should know about their diets during the holidays and staying safe and healthy?
Yeah. I would say just, trust your gut as far as, no pun intended there.
Mine lies there all the time.
Yes, but, again, balance is in kind of eating in moderation is, is every day of the week. And so, enjoy the holidays without the guilt. So, and while still indulging in some of those things that you enjoy and that are your traditions. And it's just one day, right? So that's not gonna, throw you over the edge and make you gain 20 pounds, right? It's those small increments, those habits that we do long term that really make a big impact.
And I would say too, as you're maybe eating more salty foods, more sweet foods, drinking some alcohol, you're gonna notice the scale change a little bit. You might notice fluctuations where, oh my gosh, yesterday I was 3 pounds lighter, now I'm, moved up. Generally, that can be linked to fluid, right? When we're eating salty foods, when we're drinking alcohol, our body's trying to hold on to fluid to keep us hydrated and to keep us balanced. So my message would be, don't panic when you see that. It's likely, related to fluid. And once you return back to your kind of normal routine of eating, that can kind of subside. But that also brings in, that necessity for, let's not crash diet, let's not revamp our diets and maybe throw off that fluid balance even more. Just kind of try and sustainably get back to your normal routine, and that can be helpful.
And I guess it doesn't hurt maybe to throw a little exercise in there. I know a lot of people, once they stuff themselves, let's go walk around the block at least, at the very least.
Absolutely. Yeah, we think about, that we blame it on the tryptophan, right, at
Right,
Thanksgiving.
right. Yeah.
I know we're past Thanksgiving now, but, where we crash and we're all just, out, at least my family gatherings, that's how
too.
it tends to be. And so, just saying, hey, I know it's cold, but let's put on a hat and gloves. Let's get out and get some fresh sunshine, a little bit of vitamin D, even though we don't get as much in the winter months, and that'll just boost your mood, if anything, to just get outside and get some fresh air instead of just feeling, kind of dead in the chair there. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate all the advice.
Yeah.
It's really needed around this time of year for sure, and I'm glad that you're not telling folks to just don't eat this and don't eat that.
Right.
Right.
We got to treat ourselves well during the holidays
100%.
and
Yeah.
give ourselves a bit of a break from the rest of the year.
Yes, absolutely.
Sydney Russell and Ashley Mathewson are oncology dietitians with the OSF Healthcare Cancer Institute. Thanks for everything. We appreciate it.
Thanks for
you.
having
Yep.
us.
And you can share this segment again with your friends and family before the holidays. Just go to WTVP.org and you can find out about future show topics on our Facebook and Instagram pages. And we always want to know your questions and topic suggestions. You can message me or leave me a comment on social media. Thanks for watching tonight, and take care of yourself and your family.